Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world. I'm Paul Sisler, and this is In the Moment. And I know we're a little bit behind today. I had some technical difficulties. TPAW has some technical difficulties, but we are here. We are here. So today we are going to talk about cliffhangers on the Vellum. TPAW, hello, hello, hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Doing good, doing
That has been one of those days on a Friday where everything that you think is gonna go smoothly doesn't go smoothly. I had to my apparently the Wi-Fi on my laptop is ass, and so no matter whether or not we have a gigabyte internet or not, my laptop's RAM is only 8 gigs. So I was trying to do a nifty thing where I use the little functionality on StreamYard to blur out the background and make it a bit more, little less what it has been, and failed miserably. But hey, it is what it is. We're here.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, my iPad internet, the Wi-Fi on it, it sucks. I don't know why, but it sucks. My iPhone, awesome. And of course, my computer, I have it plugged directly into the Ethernet itself. So I'm getting 150 megabytes per second. So for download,
Yeah.
I mean, running StreamYard is actually pretty good right here on the computer. But if I were to try to do it on my iPad, forget it. Forget about it. Not going to happen.
Yeah. Now, see, and that's, I don't know. Like, I went to the thrift store, which I was telling you a little bit about, to pick up a monitor because we have that TV that you see in the background. But the problem with that TV is, yes, it's nice, it's big, but at the same time, when I'm having to do like work on it, like whether or not it's writing or whether or not it's anything, I have to do this. And then like it puts a strain on your neck and then on your back and stuff. And I'm already in my 30s, so that's already like I wake up and I go, ah, even though I go to the gym and stuff. No matter how many times I slip on that massage, I go in the massage chair and I sit on it and let it like massage the muscles and everything. And you're like, oh, I'm great, good as new, and whatever. Wake up and I go, oh, it's going to be a great day. And the life goes, the fuck you are. So
Yeah.
it's just like, it is what it is. But yeah, we're going to talk cliffhangers today. We're going to talk about building suspense, having multiple twists in fiction. Um, I was struggling with what to talk about. I'm like, wait a minute, what am I going to talk about? We already covered a lot of the hero's journey. I mean, we could talk extensively about that till the end of the time. But I was like, one thing I haven't really talked about on a macro level is how to create a good cliffhanger or good suspense, like build suspense.
Yeah.
To build that pressure cooker because that's part of the tale is keeping the reader like you're in front of the story and the reader's behind the story. It's part of how you keep their interest in the first place. And so I was like, well, what makes a good cliffhanger, and that's what we're going to cover today.
Yes. Yes. I have multiple cliffhangers throughout my books that I'm writing. Just multiple little cliffhangers that leave you hanging, that build the suspense. Yes. Because it's like, what is next?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's see, and the funny thing, cute thing is that you can do it with a regular hero's journey. You can do it with heroine's journey. It applies to everything, no matter what you're telling. Even if it's like a simple mystery story or a simple like you're not telling a horror story. You're not telling anything that really requires suspense per se, but like you're building a pressure cooker when it comes to romance or when it comes to any kind of fantasy or like what you've been doing with your anti-hero and or whatever character they're going to become, whether it's going to be a Brightburn situation and they just raise hell on the earth that they live on or whatever
Yeah.
they're doing.
Now,
So
the best cliffhangers, if you want to learn how to do some real good cliffhangers, and you as the writer can help eliminate the cheesiness to it, but watch soap operas, daytime soap operas. Guiding Light, Another World, General Hospital, Santa Barbara, Days of Our Lives, all of these daytime soap operas. Every episode has cliffhangers. So it's like, granted, there's some cheesiness to daytime soap operas. I remember when I was hooked on them back in, oh my god, the 80s. I was hooked on them. Days of Our Lives, Another World, Santa Barbara. Those were like my three right there. I could not miss them. And when I was working, I would actually record them on my VCR to watch them when I got home. But the cliffhanger aspect where you're building up that suspense and people are like, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And you're left hanging. You have to get to the next chapter or you have to get to the next episode in case, in the case of, television and all that. But in the books, when you're writing a book, I have chapter cliffhangers. With each chapter, there's a buildup to what's going to happen, and some of them, they come to fruition at the end of the chapter, and other ones, like, what's next? Where does this go from here?
Yep.
Where are they taking TJ? What happened to him? Next chapter, boom, there you go.
Yes, exactly. And that's one of the things that I explore a lot with my fiction, with a lot of the stories. And it's not because it's horror, because I'm not really writing like with the idea that, oh, this is a horror story. Like, I'm not writing that. I'm writing like, what would this character do in this situation that I'm painting out for them? And I give them a sandbox to play in. And the cliffhanger for me stems from their emotional investment in the situation they're in. Because if they're afraid or they're terrified, or if someone says, like if someone comes in to reveal, it's like your reveal moment where another character who's not really a main character, but they're like they're not even the side character. They're more like the mythical character that is in the story, like the wizard or like the demon person who operates in the background and they don't operate in the foreground, but they come in to drop in this, apocalyptic like revelation. It's the level of investment that that character, like whether it's Peter, whether it's Violet, any of the narrators, like it's that level of investment they already have pre-built into the story because it's like along their journey. So like whether it's half of the story or whether it's like 75% the way in, and it's good to have cliffhangers incrementally because like a question that would be asked is, should you do a cliffhanger every chapter? You could, or to avoid repetitiveness, avoid, the reader being like, oh, I see your formula. Have it to where it's incrementally. So like every other chapter, or if it's like every 3 chapters or 4, like depending on how many your chapters you have. So if you have a 14 chapter story, it would be good to have your initial cliffhanger, or at least your initial minor cliffhanger at the beginning, because that's what's starting the story out. And then you allow breathing room in the second chapter. And then the third chapter, drop a little nugget that acts as a cliffhanger, but it's not really a cliffhanger. And then in chapters 4 and 5 and 6, you place a cliffhanger in there a little bit. So that way every other chapter, but don't do it exactly 3 or exactly 6 or exactly 9 chapters in, because then again, the reader's going to think that they're getting ahead of the story. What you do then, at least this is what I've done for my experience, is I drop in a red herring cliffhanger where you think you know what is happening and you think you're getting ahead, and the reader thinks, oh, I figured this out. I know your recipe for destruction. And then you find out later on it was a red herring. You find out it was a fake out, or you find out it was a inversion of expectations. And then suddenly they're like, holy shit, wait, what is next? Wait, I thought I was ahead, but really I'm behind still. And, you as the writer is going, yeah, keep chasing it. Keep chasing that fish. It's running away from you now. But keep the character's investment in the story going, because otherwise it's just going to be stuff. It's just going to be a thing that's happening. And so, like, that's part of why tying in with the hero's journey, that's part of why you do the hand of the villain at the very beginning. You show the antithesis of the character, the narrator you're telling. You show the opposite of them. You show the power of it, which is the hand of the villain. And then you spend the next couple chapters building on the story, building on what is there. Basically introducing your family, introducing your friends, introducing allies, introducing people that the main character can get attached to. That way there's risk behind the cliffhanger. That way when the cliffhanger does happen, suddenly there's a reason for why it's happening and it doesn't feel like a gimmick. There's a multiple facets to the idea of the cliffhanger.
Right, right. Now, there's two definitions to the cliffhanger. Okay. An ending to an episode of a serial drama that leaves the audience in suspense. A story or event with a strong element of surprise. So there you go. Now, what I like to do, anything can be a cliffhanger to some degree. All right. Again, you have that element of suspense. So, like that first kiss. So you're leading up to this romance. And of course, throughout the story, everybody's, yeah, I like them. I hope they get together. And then you have this moment where they're there, they're having this romantic moment, they're talking about whatever, and you're setting up for that first kiss. Now, you can end that segment with, did they kiss or are they going to kiss? Or you can have it interrupted and then it's like, are they going to get back to it? So there's like different things, and cliffhanger doesn't always have to be something of, hanging on the edge of a cliff. It can be that first kiss. It can be, are they going to get into a fight? You can build the tensions of characters. That's you get them a little bit edgy at each other, and now they're all confronting each other. Or the ex walks into the room. Next episode. There's so many different things that you can utilize as a cliffhanger.
I have a feeling that Paul has watched a lot of soap operas.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, no, I my mom actually brought me and my brother up on Days of Our Lives for the longest time, where we watched different episodes with her. Though I honestly felt like there needed to be a bit less repetition with that story, with that series, but that was her blood and guts was Days of Our Lives. So like for mine growing up was later on Supernatural, Smallville, other shows like that. Whereas her bread and butter was Days of Our Lives. Like anytime I knew my mom was watching TV, it was either Law and Order, the bum bum, or it was These Are the Days of Our Lives. And I'm just like, oh,
are Bo and Hope going to get together again?
Exactly.
Yes. I just wanted to add for as a lot of people know, usually you have to come onto YouTube or on Twitch to be able to leave a comment. I got my phone set up for Twitter. So if you're watching on Twitter, you can comment on Twitter and I can read it here off of my phone onto the show. So you can leave comments on Twitter now. So
awesome stuff.
yes.
Yeah, one thing I want to talk about is there are three major mechanics to a chapter that can lead to a really solid cliffhanger. There is the opening hook, which is what brings you in, so it gets you going. Then there's the flex, which is the body of the story, specific beats. Basically, when you would think that the flex is actually the cliffhanger, but it's not. Flex is when you take the initial hook and then you either introduce red herrings or you introduce other mechanics of the story. And then at the very end, you lead into the what's next, which is the twist, the cliffhanger. And it can be personal, it can be physical, or it could be mental. It doesn't really matter how you want to do the cliffhanger. It could be as simple as, an item like a hat or a literal cliff, if that's what you want to do with yours. It could easily be a mirror. It could be like, because that would be psychological horror. Like, let's say the character's looking in a mirror and like it's a magical mirror, and they're either seeing themselves or they're seeing another metaphysical entity that's in the mirror, and that could be used as a cliffhanger. It all depends on how you want to play it. When I'm talking about this, it's not this is what you have to do. It's this is what you can do. Also, another thing is I don't like fluff myself. I was saying that to the wife in the car as we were driving, and it's funny is right after in my head, I was like thinking to myself, I'm like, you could use fluff if you really want to, but I like it lean with like lots of meat and very little fat. how I like my steaks too, because otherwise you're just cutting off bits of steak and you're just like looking as the pile of extra fat is, piling up on the plate, and you're like, can't we just like cut the fat? But what's funny is we were outside and she didn't even notice that she didn't even know that I was thinking this, because I was thinking about what things to say on here on this podcast, because I was trying to think of all the things I could say in the hour, and I was like, fluff. Not a big fan of fluff, but you could use it. It's more like styrofoam. But she was funny as the snow was falling outside, and she's all like, "It's so fluffy outside." I'm like, "Wait a minute! I just was thinking about fluff for story." Like, finding a way to make it to where everything that happens in the story is absolutely necessary. That way, you're like circumventing the drafting process, because like you could say, like, people on average would do 14 drafts, right? Or however many drafts that they need to do to get to the resolution of, basically not resolution of the story, but like, I am here, I need to be able to publish this, or I can take this to an editor now. For me, I tend to do it in 3 or 4 drafts, because I like to try and remove as much of what you're going to cut as necessary. That way, later on, you have done the extra field work and you've done the extra work necessary to prevent having to cut much. So, like for instance, Snake of the Dame, the recent project I've been working on, I've got the first draft, which is us getting the story down. It's laying out all the bones. And then the second draft is adding all the meat and other stuff that you left out of the first draft. You would think the third draft is then polishing. No, it's the extended version of the second draft. It's me adding in more stuff that didn't get added in, fill-ins, if you will, but like they're not fluff. They're just simply, this is what's needed to tell the story. This is what's needed to get to the spot. I left out this. Let's go ahead and plug this in. So it's basically plugging in all the stuff that I left out so that I could fill it in, essentially. And it's like doing a painting. You do the initial sketch, and then you're doing the initial add-ins, and you're like, wait, I'm missing this here, missing this here. In order to keep the balance down here and up here, I have to fill in a little bit. So in order to prevent multiple drafts of being like, well, now I'm on my 10th draft for this one project, and they're like, oh, so you're dealing with developmental hell. It's like, yeah. No, so in order to avoid developmental hell, you structure the shit out of it, and you're like, hey, I have a skeleton, but let's go ahead and make sure the skeleton is solid. And so how that factors into cliffhangers is the cliffhangers help keep you ahead of the story. They don't keep you behind the story. Because when you start getting behind the story, then the reader themselves is like, oh, I know the ending already. Or this story wasn't well written, or this story could have used 3 or 4 more drafts, or could have used it. There's always, whenever you watch a movie, especially, you're always like, oh, this could have used another revision, or they could have used the script doctor. So to prevent that resolution, to prevent that from happening, prevent that being a fate, you do one extra revision of it, but you do a bunch of structuring, you do a bunch of pre-planning. And then when you're in the middle of it and you're in the thick of it, you keep the vision intact, but you do a little extra ahead of time. So that way, later on, when you're having to actually edit it and actually figure out what to cut, you're like, oh shit, all this shit's needed. It's hard to figure out what to cut. So then you have to get the extra pair of eyes.
Yes.
And with the hook, with the cliffhanger, the cliffhanger can actually help you with that. Because the cliffhanger will then show you this is what's needed, this is what's not needed. Because if this doesn't lead to a build up to that suspense, and this doesn't lead to that, that helpful hand with the cliffhanger to keep Paul's interest, or to keep my interest or anybody else's interest when we're reading it, then you probably should cut it. It's like, okay, well, that probably could actually get chopped off. You can, if you want to keep it that badly, maybe rewrite it for another part of the story, or if you ever make a sequel. If you're not making the sequel and it's just going to be one book, then that makes it a lot harder. But if you're doing sequels, you could be like, well, let's just take that part out because it's not that needed, not as much as I thought it was. Let's plug it into the next draft. Let's use that same mechanic and then use that idea for a future story. And maybe it'll actually work better too.
Yes. Now, I like to use a lot of foreshadowing. Okay.
Yes.
And you were bringing up like red herrings. I like to foreshadow red herrings. I like to foreshadow plans that don't go right. these help me with my cliffhangers. I'll foreshadow a situation that you think is going to happen or you think is planned out, and it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And that when you can foreshadow an event and then you can make it go wrong, that creates huge suspense, and that's where you can leave people hanging until the next chapter or the next book, you know. So
Exactly.
foreshadowing is key to a great cliffhanger.
Yes. Yeah, no, I could turn this into an entire class on how to use cliffhangers effectively and how I've been seeing them used effectively. Red herrings are actually one of my favorite things to use because they're not like red herring by extension is an illusion. It's part of the magic trick. You know, it's when you're trying when the magician's trying to pull the rabbit out of the hat or trying to do whatever the trick they're trying to do. Basically, the red herring is like it's part of the disguise. It's throwing you off from the trail and making you think that something's happening when really it's this thing that's happening. And it's essentially like putting two bodies in one big box, putting a sword through it, and you're like, wait, did they die or not? And then you find out that they both survived, and you're like, how the hell did that happen?
Right. Get them looking over here while I got something going on right here. You know, they're looking
Yep,
up here. They're not seeing this. Yes.
it's the coin that you pull out of the ear.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I love red herrings. I love using them. One person that did use them quite well that people don't like talking about is J.K. Rowling. Another person that people like talking about a lot is Stephen King. And Stephen King is foreshadowing and red herrings were just aplenty in his stories. And a lot of his stories didn't have sequels. A lot of them were one-offs.
Mm-hmm.
Like you had Carrie, that was a one-off. You had The Shining, that was supposed to be a one-off, but then it turned into a sequel, Doctor Sleep. And then you had The Stand, and you had like many other stories. You had It. That one never got a sequel. The movie did because they decided they wanted to, and then they're also doing a prequel of the sequel. They're going back in time before it even happened, and are going back in time to before the kids were around to Pennywise. I guess maybe Pennywise is deciding he's going to torture a whole new group of kids from before them, and same stuff's going to happen. So I wonder how they fell for that one. But yeah, like I then again in that story, didn't they talk about in the story? Didn't they show that like that before Pennywise terrorized Derry and he terrorized the Loser Club that there was a previous group of kids or the previous people that he tortured. I don't remember exactly, but I think I remember them looking in the news archives and finding out that Pennywise had been there before. But that's part of the cliffhangers. Like if you ever studied, I don't know if you Paul, have you ever studied a horror film?
Oh,
Like
I
the mechanics?
yes, I pick apart horror films because most horror films actually aren't that well written. There's a lot of real, I mean, especially a lot of your slasher ones, but the things that they utilize that keep you intrigued, you either have oh, of course you got your TNA horror films that they use that to keep you interested. You have your slashers where who's getting killed next. You just you know that hey, there's 8 kids at this camp and all but one are probably going to die. So who's getting it first? Blah blah blah. So there's where they kind of entrance you in. They have the spooky. They might do humor with it, but when you're breaking down who's getting it next, that's what a lot of them have become. Now, when you go back to like old school type horror, take like the Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
Um, you got your build up of hey, what are these dead people, zombies? Everybody starts to gather at this house, and now you have how do you agree upon what you're going to do? Who's going to take control? I mean, the suspense in it was great, and then of course, do they survive? Who gets eaten, who doesn't? I mean, you talk about a great horror movie, Night of the Living Dead, one of the all-time greats, you know. So, excuse me, when you're writing horror, um, you look at a lot of the old vampire movies and stuff like that. Again, there's a lot of really bad ones. Then as you come up to more of your modern horror, there's some that are really good, some really good storylines, some real good premises. Take like the whole Freddy Krueger, the Michael Myers, the Jason Voorhees. They're all basically the same with these minor differences on how they, perpetrate it. Where, Halloween was the spooky, it wasn't funny. Freddy Krueger throws in the humor, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Jason Voorhees, um,
Just stand there ominously like a stalker.
uh,
Just stand there ominously like a stalker.
so I mean, when you start breaking down, what is it that keeps you going back? What is it that drives you in a horror movie? Who's going to die next? You
Yep.
know, I mean, that's basically what it is. And, who's going to get killed? Who's going to survive? And what's the cliffhanger in relation to, did the monster die or not?
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy. No, and what's funny is with Elm Street, one thing that they did that really like mystified me when I like watched it as an adult, because as a child you're terrified of it naturally because it's this guy with a burned face and he's wearing a Christmas sweater with a cat, what looks like a cowboy hat, and he's got a glove on his hand with blades coming out of it. So of course that's terrifying for a child or a teenager. But when you're watching as an adult, suddenly you're trying to take it apart because you're an adult and you're like watching it. You're like, what about this got me as a child? And the thing that I found that awesome about Elm Street, actually, that like yes, Halloween used scary music. Yes, Michael Myers just walking and having that little the music playing was scary and everything. But I think that the thing that really got me when I was watching Elm Street, and this is like we're talking like 5-6 years ago, I revisited it, and the thing that really got me was the fact that of his usage of his minions, which were the dead teenagers. And like I don't even know where the hell they came from. Like I don't even know if they explained that. Like I don't remember them explaining where the teenagers came from and why, whenever Nancy or any of her friends were walking around the school, they were getting visited by these dead ghosts that would sing to them. And they'd be like, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Like I was like trying to figure out where they came from. I was like, where are you? You've got this nursery rhyme thing going on and everything, and that's helping building tension like out the ass. And then you suddenly got Nancy who's trying not to go to sleep, because if she goes to sleep, then Freddy attacks her or attacks any of her friends, and she watches slowly as all of them get killed off. And so that's building suspense, of course. But the usage of the music and the usage of songs help build suspense, which also ties into my next topic, which is comedy can build suspense. Comedy can have cliffhangers. In fact, part of the joke
I'm gonna need a bigger boat.
Yeah, part of the joke is the build up. Part of the you have your small mini jokes, penny punchlines that build up to the ultimate punchline, and comedians use this all the time with their stand up, because they'll have like different sections of their stand up that each have a stage, and each one of them build up to that big stage. And so comedy is horror's cousin. It's his twin cousin, twin brother. And comedy has the same thing. Like you're laughing, you're not terrified, but laughter is often a nervous reaction to an event. And so in comedy is also used to diffuse tension. But if you use it the correct way, then with like characters like the Joker, then suddenly you've got this eerie effect when it comes to comedy, which is what dark comedy is. Morbid comedy.
Yes.
The Killing Joke, if you will.
Well, I mean, my show on Saturdays, Comedy and Controversy, I'm taking political things and I'm illustrating how comedians and other people and all that make humor from it. Use humor to tell the truth. So I really love that aspect in horror movies. And I'll bring up Jaws because Jaws, if you watch Jaws, there's your monster really isn't there until the end of the movie. Okay.
Yep.
And you have people that die. You have the fin out in the water. And what are we going to do? We're going to hunt it and kill it. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Get everybody out of the water. The little cliffhanger, like, is the shark going to kill somebody again? So you got lots of little cliffhangers. And then, of course, the line that everybody remembers is, we're going to need a bigger boat.
Bigger boat. Yep.
And then you just know this shark is going to destroy that boat. You don't know how, but that's going to happen. And it builds up to the end. Does everybody get eaten, or does somebody survive? So yeah.
Plus their usage of open, empty water with fins and stuff. And like, it's the usage of the monster at the end of the tale, or the monster at the end of the book, or it's the usage of the monster beyond the doorway. Like when you open up the door, the monster appears.
Right.
That's kind of what the water functioned like that in that movie. I'd have to revisit Jaws again. I haven't seen that movie in ages, but you do bring a good point there.
Yes. And there's the constant cliffhangers. You got all these little cliffhangers throughout the whole show that build up that suspense. So cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger to build up that suspense for the ultimate at the end, the battle with the shark. So I mean, that movie was just well done. The book was well done. Loved it. And again, looking for good cliffhangers, I think Jaws is a good example of good cliffhangers.
It is, yeah, for sure. Another one that's a good example is Evil Dead. Do you remember Evil Dead? Sam Raimi?
Yeah, vaguely. For some reason, that movie just didn't do it for me.
So every time I think Evil Dead, I think of its sequel, Army of Darkness, where Ash, like Bruce Campbell as Ash, holds up the shotgun and goes, "This is my boomstick," and everyone around him's like, "Ah!" And it's very campy, but very awesome. It reminds me of Ash vs. the Evil Dead, which is a TV show that came out decades later, and they revisited some of the, because that's something that Sam does a lot with his films, is he will revisit previous plots and then take and spin them a different way, and that's kind of what leads to some of his movies. He did the same thing with Evil Dead, with Ash vs. the Evil Dead. Is that like some of the textbook notions of what's happened, like whether the camera is moving super fast, or at least it's moving slowly, but like it's got the illusion of speed when it's moving, and you can hear the music, which tells you that something bad is going to happen, or that the spirit's going to chase after somebody. You've got that, that's like a building cliffhanger within a cliffhanger. And so, you've got like different, that's why I love cliffhangers. Like I love cliffhangers. I love using them. I love the momentum of them, because it's using your imagination. It's using your dread, using your fear of the unexpected, using your fear of the unknown to plant a knife twisting moment, to plant a red herring.
Right. Well, and there's lots of tropes that go along with cliffhangers, like the runaway train trope. Okay.
Yes.
You got a lot of movies that use the runaway train. Even Spider-Man, one of the movies where, trying to stop the train using all of his webs and all that, So, I mean, the runaway train, that's, again, suspense, cliffhanger. Will you stop the train in time? Is it going to crash? What's going to happen? Blah, blah, blah. So, great. Again, another great suspense creator.
That scene was directed by Sam Raimi, who did Evil Dead and did Army of Darkness. So that lends to the credence of right there. Like that. See, that's the thing, is Sam Raimi, he is fantastic at what he does. Like he was one of the earliest teachers when it came to cliffhangers, when it came to building suspense for me as a child, because his career was happening when I was growing up as a kid. So when the first Spider-Man came out and the Goblin was the main bad guy, I literally watched No Way Home, Spider-Man the sequel of Far From Home. I watched the No Way Home where Goblin actually comes back, and well, I got like to like the third act, and I was like, this is why the Goblin is the OG. Because you know the guy who directed that one took nods and took influences from Sam Raimi's version of Spider-Man and utilized it well. Like that was another thing about Spider-Man is he's one of the characters in Marvel that actually utilizes cliffhangers a lot. Like they utilize cliffhangers constantly with Spider-Man because he's got a lot of rogues gallery. He's got a lot of one-off villains. And he's got a lot of characters who will pop up later or they'll only pop up for that one chapter, and so they're able to do the zinger and they're able to do the cliffhanger that leads you to be like, well, what the hell? Okay, so he faced a scorpion last week. He's facing a vulture guy this week. Now he's got a talking goblin, and you're like, does Spider-Man just have dark fantasy characters as villains? He's like, yes. They're also named animals because, like, you got Rhino.
We got Bryce in here. Is there a specific formula that you are supposed to adhere to, or is typical for creative writers to be completely free form? Bryce, are you talking in relation to a cliffhanger on how to create a cliffhanger? Because there's many avenues to go in relation to creating a cliffhanger. Like I said, you can have romance being your aspect for creating a cliffhanger, like the first kiss, or are they going to hook up, or whatever the case may be there. Are they going to fall in love at the end, which a lot of that's very predictable, I mean, especially if it's a romantic novel. I mean, that's the whole idea of the romantic novels. They end up together in the end. Talking about horror, who's going to die, who's not. Runaway trains. Take like Speed, the bus. If it drops below, what was it, like 55 miles an hour, it's going to blow up.
Yep.
Bombs are huge. What are we going to do to get the information to find out where the bomb is at? Can we get to it in time? And of course there's always the countdown and there's always 1 second left, but anyways, but I don't like the predictable cliffhangers in the aspect of the countdown's going, it gets down to 1 second and they stop it. I'm sorry, stop it when there's like 20 seconds left on the clock or something like that. Do you adhere to any plot formulas at all, or just write what you want?
I write what I want. Like I honestly do. Because the reason why, remember how last week I said that write what you're interested in, or write what you're invested in. This plays into that because like if you are writing a story that you have no interest in, that you have no passion for, how the fuck are you supposed to create a cliffhanger? I mean, you can, it'd just be cheaply made. It'll be like buying it from like an outsourced importer from China that was cheaply made and wasn't really well crafted. You'd basically be trying to create a cliffhanger, and you'd be like, "Well, I don't give a shit about this, but reader, do you give a crap about this?" So, I would write. This is my answer to that question. I would write something you're interested in. If you're already comfortable writing without a formula, then do that. But if you need a formula to help give you structure, look for the formula that is appealing to you, that you'd have interest in.
I kind of do both, Bryce. I do an outline. All right. So if I'm going to write a story, I do a complete outline of where I want it to go. In relation to, as I'm writing, I go where the story leads me, so I'm writing the story and other ideas come into play. I'm going to adjust my outline to fit accordingly. As far as like you write in first person, you don't suddenly switch to third person, you're writing a book in first person present, you stay in first person present. If you're writing in third person present or third person past, you stay in that. Can you change it in and out? You probably could, but you might lose your reader along the way. You might make it more confusing. So are there formulas? There's definitely formulas. Do we write what we want? I I think for most writers, and I would have to ask more writers, but from what I've got just from the writers that I've talked to, the story kind of writes itself. You
Hmm.
get this concept and or this idea, and you just start writing. And when something doesn't make sense, you go back and you fix it. If it's a trope or a platform of something, you kind of adhere to it to some degree, but you also don't want to be predictable. So you do twists and turns, and it's still a formula, but you might be creating your own formula as you go, or you might be combining formulas as you go. So, do we adhere to any plot formulas? I don't think any writer truly adheres to a plot formula, with the exception of probably maybe your romantic writers, your romance novels. Um, I think they probably adhere to the concept of here's your people and they're going to fall in love at the end. Otherwise it just wouldn't be a romance novel. So um outside of those probably being and again, I could be wrong, but just from my own personal reading experiences, I find romance novels to be predictable. I find horror movies to be, for the most part, predictable. Most of your slasher type films, I find them to be predictable. Scream kind of threw in a whole different aspect to the idea of
Oh,
horror,
I love Scream.
and a parody aspect, and they created something a little bit different, and it was enjoyable. And then of course you got your sequels, and then yeah. Anyway, so
Well, you have the reporter that also does the final killing blow to one of the killers, because the entire time the killers are they're quote unquote following the rules of a horror movie,
right,
and half that movie is literally just a parody of its genre. And then the reporter, who at the beginning you're like, this character's kind of annoying and whatever, but then she ends up becoming the one that deals the final killing blow to one of the killers and completely throws you off. So there's a way of being able to follow the formula without following the formula, like being able to do it without being exactly predictable. Like, how you're saying that certain movies are predictable. Well, that's where you can invert expectation, but you do it tastefully in a way that like makes sense to the story and the characters, not just being like, oh, I'm inverting it, watch me invert it, yay, this is so great. No, instead it has to make sense of the story, because like if you're doing it in a climactic moment, that could piss off everybody. But if you're doing it in like a moment where like it makes sense to invert it just a bit and be like, well, you're expecting me to do this, but I think that the characters want to do this instead. Whether that's, into my example, that is, let's say that you're expecting Rey from The Last Jedi to stay in the light side, and let's say Rey decides to go dark side, and let's say Kylo Ren starts to go more in his uncle's footsteps instead of his grandfather's footsteps, and he decides to go Jedi or something. Or by the time you get to the end of the movie, both characters that are supposed to be on either side of the world flip, and therefore you've got an inversion of expectation. And then let's say Luke Skywalker is going to go take on the First Order, and he's like, "What did you expect me to do? Take on the whole entire First Order? That's stupid." And then instead he ends up taking on the First Order just in a different way. Instead of him doing some mirage fake fight, instead he helps out Rey defeat Kylo Ren, and then instead it flips on itself, and Rey turns to the dark side, and he ends up helping his own nephew anyway, and gets I'm making up a different movie that exists right now because The Last Jedi,
right,
as it stands, is the way it is. But you could play around with it. You could play around with the plotting so it makes sense and also advances the character arcs.
right. One of the other things is like a lot of people don't expect the main character to die. You know, you want to throw in a good cliffhanger, you kill off the main character. And you create a new main character. You make somebody else the main character. Um, People don't expect that. Now, it might piss your reader off because they really love your main character, but you can always bring them back to life. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. Like I said, there's a lot of different formulas. I like to take a formula and divert from it because, again, I don't want it to be predictable. And what really makes a lot of the best writing that's out there is when you take away the predictability. I mean, obviously, you know there's going to be a happy ending. Get rid of the happy ending. Don't make it a happy ending. Make it a make it the ending that nobody expects. Like, oh my God, have a rebel cause come in, and there's your next book. The rebels coming to fight back. Make them lose. You expect them to take over? No, make them lose. Now you can have another book. It keeps people going because now it's like, what are they going to do? There's your cliffhangers. Like you thought they were going to win, but they lost. Well, what's going to happen? Marvel did that with
Yep. Infinity War.
Yeah.
Thanos snapped. They got what he wanted, and half the universe got snapped.
Yeah, and
The
you're like,
villain got what he wanted.
what the hell? So yeah, that was not predictable. I mean, unless you read the comic and you knew how it went. I mean,
The way they did it was really well, though. Like I
right,
really loved
people
how
like me,
Infinity War played out.
I don't read the comics, so when that happened, I was like, what the hell? Now I have to watch the next one. When's it coming out? Because I didn't expect that.
I didn't realize this. You're not a comic book reader, are you?
What's that?
You're not a comic book reader, are you?
I'm not a what?
A comic book reader.
No, I'm not a comic book reader.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a massive comic book reader. Like I not only do I read the comic books, but then I'll read up like on the theories or on the other things that people will talk about on the internet. Obviously a lot of the comics that they're adapting right now came out before I was even born. Some of them came out later after I was born, but a lot of them were in the 80s and the 70s. But yeah, no, I'm pretty well versed in a lot of the comic lore. So when I go into a movie, I'm basically just watching fan fiction adaptations.
I like endings that are mind fucks. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Pulp
Absolutely. Hello,
Fiction,
Shadow Fox. Hello.
Fight
Yes,
Club, Pulp Fiction.
yes, yes. Pulp Fiction. Now there's a movie that was well done that just kept you going like, what the hell? What's going on? I gotta rewatch this. Another good movie, Reservoir Dogs. You want to talk about cliffhangers throughout the whole thing. As everybody's coming back, and who's going to believe who's going to kill who's going to turn on who. It's just like, you've known me over all of these years. But I mean, it's just like you got the triangle shooting, you got Michael Madsen going nutso. I mean, I tell you, cutting the ear off. Oh my God, if you haven't seen Reservoir Dogs, you got to watch Reservoir Dogs again. Another one of the best movies ever made, full of cliffhangers, great foreshadowing, great suspense, and it doesn't have the ending you would predict it to have.
Yeah, that you would expected. Yeah, no,
Have you
I love a lot of different movies that I actually like. I know that in the news media, a couple of people have been talking about how DC directors have been getting kind of burnt out with like the drama that happens with DC and Warner Brothers. Um, so I think that there's going to be a resurgence soon of movies that take more of an art film approach, or movies that take a bit more of a Pulp Fiction approach or Fight Club, where it's very much the plot twist or the final twist of the story is so embedded and so foreshadowed on, but then red herrings, but that by the time you get to the ending, you're like, the fuck just happened?
I guess I feel like most readers expect stories to develop to a certain way depending on the topic. If the formula isn't satisfied, then it might be less popular, and that might contaminate the creative part. Actually, it's the opposite. You're still going through the legs of what a formula would be, but you have to change something up to draw people in, because even though they're expecting a certain type of thing, they either want more of something or they want less of something. Take like John Wick 4. I mean, it's got like more action scenes than any movie that's ever been made. This is driving people crazy. They're like, yes, that's what I wanted. Now, granted, that doesn't fit the formula. Okay, there's
Yeah.
there's less story with it's a well told story, but there's less story time versus fighting time, and little bits of the story are in there just enough to tell you the story with more fighting and more fighting and more fighting. So breaking the formula while using the formula is key. You have to do something that goes just outside of it a little bit, not too far, because yeah, if you go too far, you're absolutely right. Because if the movie has certain expectations and it doesn't meet those expectations, you're going to lose people. So you have to meet and exceed the expectations, but you can't do it by sticking to an exact formula. You have to break that formula somewhere.
There's also a balance of not only genres but also flavors. Like, let's say you have drama going on still, because very first John Wick started out with a tragedy. Started out with him losing his dog. That's kind of what caused him to go off the deep end and seek revenge.
Right.
Um, and then when you like get to the fourth one, at that point we already know it's a franchise. They're just trying to make money off it, yes. But there's also a balancing of like intrigue, drama. Um, there's the fight scenes, yes, which it's part of the action genre. But when you mesh it and you synchronize the very elasticity of different genres playing with each other, then you've got this balancing of tastes and balancing of flavors that help create a balance of cohesion in which you're not having to think too deeply on it. And as you've said before, like a little bit ago, it practically writes itself.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, kind of like if you're going to write let's say you're going to write a medieval story and you're instead of using like medieval language, you're using modern day language in it. Okay.
Yep.
Modern day thought processes. You're to some people that might be attractive, to other people that's going to throw them off because it's medieval. They're expecting medieval type language, you know. So what do you do? There's like certain shows that I've watched that it's like Vikings and stuff like that. They speak with a Norwegian or a Greenlander type accent versus if they just spoke like we do today in this country, it wouldn't have the same effect. So there comes an authenticity aspect to everything that you write. So when you're writing, if it feels authentic, you're going to have the reader just drooling for what's next.
Yep.
So that aspect you got to pretty much run with that formula. Now, can you divert there? Yeah, because you go back to 200 BC. They didn't have the word fuck and they didn't have the word shit. And yet you can write a movie back then and utilize that language because people comprehend it today. So unless, you want to keep it, very authentic to the way it was, there's some modernization you can throw in there and it's going to add to it, So again, you got to
Exactly.
choose where you're going to divert from the formula. But as far as the story goes, we basically, the story writes itself.
Exactly. That's why I feel like a lot of these stories where we talk about tension and cliffhangers, a lot of it comes from the emotional investment in the characters. Because if you haven't built up too much when it comes to the emotional investment and like who they're connected to, who they care about, then bottom line, no matter how many cliffhangers you throw at it, it's going to feel gimmicky. So in order to make a gimmicky thing not be a gimmick, you do have to have emotional buy-in from the readers. Like, you have to create a sense of lovingness. You have to create a sense of, you know, tangent, like something for the reader to latch onto. There has to be something physical or a physicality to that thing. Like, let's say it's a hug, or let's say it's an item that is got personal tie to. Like, you have to have some sort of buy-in from the readers in order for you to even have a cliffhanger in the first place. So, and that's something that I was writing down as one of the twists, or one of the things that's part of the cliffhanger. Is cliffhanger literally means you're having someone hanging by the thread, and you've built up enough suspense and enough dread that they have a fear of something to lose, or they have a fear of something that, you know, is going to happen unexpectedly that's not good to somebody they care about that is a fictional character. And so a lot of it ties into the idea, like, yeah, we're talking about Pulp Fiction, we're talking about those other movies. There is a massive bond between a couple of characters in order for that cliffhanger to work, or in order for that red herring to play off, because that red herring is it's an illusion, it's a mirage. And so Bryson asked about formulas. Formulas are literally just recipes that somebody else created, and then they became popular, or they became something that made fiction work. They made, you know, the story work. And yes, there's a predictability because of the fact that you've seen it happen before. But if you do it in a different way, like you do it your own way, or you do it in a way that lands well, then even though it's predictable because the raid has already happened before, you can still recreate that in a way that you're applying your own methodology to it, and you can still make it work, and it still have the cliffhanger having somebody hanging by a thread and chomping at the bit to get to the what's next. So we don't need to get lost inside of overthinking how it works. Work on the heart of the story. Work on what makes your heart work. Work on what makes the character care about other people in the story. Even a serial killer like Dexter cared about his sister, like,
Right.
massively, and that was part of a season. That was an entire season arc, was keeping Deborah safe. Was, you know, making sure that his sister didn't get killed. And so when they revealed that his sister survived, it was like this giant breath of fresh air, because his one coworker doubted him and thought, you know, rightly so, that he was up to something that he shouldn't be up to. Dexter used the frequency rate of success of solving crimes in Florida, the 20% rate. He used that to help him kill the killers, kill the murderers, kill the criminals. And the thing that led to suspense with that character was that he was building a relationship with a woman. He had a sister. He had coworkers that actually did like him. And so you've got this heart of the story that's beating, that is making Dexter human. You know, even though he's a serial killer, it's making him human. They're humanizing a killer, humanizing a murderer. And they used multiple different red herrings and multiple different cliffhangers in that story to keep you going along. And it became a very, like, I was super pissed at the finale of Dexter, the initial finale, like, because of the fact of,
Yes.
because of what they did with one of the other characters. I didn't like how they made Dexter what they did with him, but at the same time, I understood that, you know, it's hard to redeem a character who has spent their entire season or series killing multiple people. It's hard to redeem that.
Right.
But at the same time, you know, there's this weird, like, sense of joy you get from watching a serial killer be a hero, and not do it in a more conventional hero way, but he's still being a hero. He's still helping save other people. And then he goes back to being a human, or at least acting like he's a human within the world. Like, there's something delicious about that. About watching a character who, in any other fiction, any other show, would have been considered a villain, or would have been considered a supervillain. But instead, he's just simply considered a very multifaceted, neutral, evil character who's, you know, killing other killers, or killing other more evil people. And his sister must stay safe, and that's what makes him human.
Right. And again, the thing with like Dexter and all that, you're rooting for the serial killer. You want him
Yes.
to get away with it. So there's a twist on the formula right there. You don't make the villain the good guy.
Yep.
Okay. And that's what they did with Dexter. Now you can turn around and look at a lot of vampire werewolf movies, and where you had this era where they were always evil, and then you started getting where that kind of turned a little bit, where the vampires are now good guys, or they're not as scary or as evil as what it was made out to be. Take, like, you remember the show, the movie Lost Boys?
Yeah.
It was like the beginning of the turning of how the vampire was portrayed. Granted,
Yes.
there were some movies before that, but that kind of like that was a big box office movie. And now you start looking at things like True Blood. You know, um,
Yep.
now we're vampires out in the open, and there's good vampires and bad vampires, Vampire Diaries, so on and so forth. You start getting all of these twists on the formula that create new formulas, kind of like what I'm doing. There's never been a vampire druid movie, okay, or book. My book is Vampires and Druids. I'm bringing those two folklores together, and I'm changing the lore, you know. Um,
Yep.
and if you go back to the origins of vampire lore, werewolf lore, and look how it's changed, then look how they brought in vampires and werewolves, vampires, werewolves, and witches, vampires, werewolves, witches, and ghosts. You start comboing it all up. Each one changes the formula and becomes its own formula. You know,
Exactly.
I
Yeah,
mean,
and you could take and you could create cliffhangers out the ass with those changes too. That's that thing that I think that we're needing to make as a point on this thing is that a cliffhanger is only a cliffhanger if there's something to fear to lose. If
right.
there's nothing to fear to lose, then the cliffhanger doesn't exist anymore. So always create something that is fear to lose, and you'll always have a cliffhanger that works.
Yes. Or fear to harm.
Yes,
Fear to harm.
exactly. Exactly. Create something that you yourself care about as a writer, but create something that your fictional character can care about that they fear to lose, and you'll always have a cliffhanger. Like no matter what. Whether
Yes.
it's them, whether it's their friend, whether it's their relative, whether it's their dog or whatever characters you have in the story. If there's something to lose, that is a cliffhanger. Even if you're like, oh well, my character doesn't have anything to lose. Okay, that's cool. You'll still have a cliffhanger. The cliffhanger is in the absence of loss because because then your story is no longer about what do they care about. It's about what do they not care about that leads them to care about something. It's an inversion. It's an inversion of ideals.
Right. Which still comes back to loss or harm.
Exactly.
Exactly. All right. I hope that we entertained you, and I hope that we educated. I hope we provided some knowledge. Cliffhangers. Just every time you watch a movie or read a book now, just kind of watch for the cliffhanger, because it's in there. It's in there. Everything's got even if it's a small little cliffhanger, there's always going to be a cliffhanger somewhere, because it's going to be what's going to happen. Is harm going to come? What are they going to lose? So just kind
What's
of,
beyond that door? What's on the other side of that darkness? Like you
yes,
know, like when you're out, it could be as simple as like you're stepping outside, especially if you're female. Males have it too. But you're stepping outside, you're going to the parking lot to go to your car, and you hear a weird noise or sound, and you're trying to unlock your vehicle to get inside of it, and suddenly you feel like this weird sense of fear prickling on your neck as you're hearing weird sounds. That in itself is building up suspense. And then as you open the door and you sit inside the door, and then suddenly someone taps on the front of your windshield and goes, "Ah," that could be considered a cliffhanger.
yeah. Discovery is another good cliffhanger. Like
Yes.
treasure chest. Let's open it. Up. Next book. Next episode.
Yep.
What's in the treasure chest. So you also have the what is there? What what
Exactly.
what's discovered? What did we discover? Or you open up vial and the gas comes out. What did we just let loose?
Yep.
Discovery. All right, TPAW. Great episode. Catch you again next week, my brother.
Yep. Same time, same bat channel. Vellum.
All right. Remember, everyone, be kind, be happy, and may good things come your way.
Have a week.